Hey everyone, ready to dive into something that's probably been on your mind lately? Grocery prices.
Mhm.
I swear, every time I swipe my card at the checkout, I'm like, whoa, deep breaths now. It feels like things are just getting so
I
expensive.
hear you. It's definitely a hot topic.
Right. But you know what's really interesting? We've been digging into some recent data, and it seems like groceries might actually be more affordable now than they were a few years ago.
Yeah, I know that might sound kind of counterintuitive. It
Totally.
definitely seems like we're shelling out more at the register.
For sure.
But when you look at it from an economist's perspective and factor in how much wages have increased, a different picture starts to emerge.
Okay, so let's break this down. The data we're looking at compares how many hours the average person had to work to buy a week's worth of groceries.
hmm
Back in 2019, it took over 3.5 hours of work to pay for those groceries.
It's true.
Can you believe that?
And you know that number has fluctuated over the decades. Back in the 1980s, it was actually significantly higher.
Wow, really? So even though the price tags at the grocery store seem higher than ever, we're actually working less to put food on the table than we were a few decades ago.
Yes, that's the gist. Our earning power has outpaced grocery inflation, at least in recent years. And there's another layer to this. Think back to the late 90s and early 2000s. Food prices were steadily dropping for a good chunk of time there.
Totally. I remember when a gallon of milk was under $2. Those were the days. Getting used to those lower prices probably plays a big part in how we're reacting to prices now, don't you think?
Exactly. That's where the psychology of prices comes into play. Economists look at inflation as the rate of change in prices, but for most of us, it's not about percentages. It's about seeing that price tag for milk jump from $2 to $4, and suddenly our brains go haywire.
It's like our brains skip the whole percentage increase calculation and go straight to $5 for milk. You've got to be kidding me.
Yeah. Right. That's sticker shock in a nutshell. And that immediate visceral reaction is a big part of why it can be hard to reconcile what the data tells us, that groceries are relatively more affordable with what we feel every time we're at the store, which is my grocery bill is outrageous.
Makes you wonder how much of this whole groceries are too expensive narrative
Mm.
is driven by our brains freaking out at those price tags.
It's definitely a factor. Our brains love to latch on to those concrete examples, those stark price differences. But to get a clearer picture, we need to zoom out and look at the bigger economic context. It's not just about what's happening at the grocery store.
It's like we're so focused on the grocery aisle, but maybe our rent's also gone up by like $200 a month, or our health insurance premiums have like doubled.
Exactly.
Suddenly, that extra dollar for a loaf of bread feels like a way bigger deal.
Yeah, groceries are just one piece of the puzzle. And when those other costs of living, like you said, housing, healthcare, education,
Mm.
when those are increasing at a faster rate than our incomes, it's no wonder that those grocery prices feel like they're just under a giant magnifying glass.
It's like spilling your coffee on your shirt on the way to work and then realizing you left your phone at home. It's not just one thing, it's the combination.
It really is. And this whole conversation about grocery prices, it gets even more interesting when you bring in the political angle because let's be real, in an election year, everybody's kind of looking for that issue that's going to resonate with voters.
Well, yeah.
And nothing hits closer to home than the cost of putting food on the table.
Absolutely. And both Trump and Harris, they've both made grocery prices a central theme in their 2024 campaigns. Although they're approaching it from different angles, it's almost like they're speaking to those different ways we experience grocery prices, the data versus our gut reactions.
That's a really good point, actually. Trump's approach seems to lean really heavily into that visceral sticker shock reaction.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
He's even been using a graphic that shows the price increases of common grocery items, like that $4 gallon of milk we were talking about.
Right. It's very much a look how much worse things have gotten kind of message.
Yeah,
And visually, it's very effective.
it is. Even if some of those numbers he's using have been challenged for not aligning with the official data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics,
Oh, interesting.
but the message is clear. These prices are too high, and it's the current administration's fault.
Right. Harry Harris, on the other hand, is taking a more systemic approach, right?
Right. She's focusing on what she sees as the root causes of these higher prices. Her campaign is calling for stricter regulations to try to prevent price gouging by grocery stores and suppliers,
Interesting.
who they argue are taking advantage of inflation and supply chain issues to increase their profits.
It is interesting, though, because both sides are really hammering home this message that groceries are just outrageously expensive.
Mm.
But as we've been unpacking, the reality is a bit more nuanced. It's not necessarily that groceries are objectively unaffordable for the average person. It's more about how those prices make us feel, given everything else going on in the economy.
Exactly. And that's why I think it's so crucial for us to be aware of these psychological factors that are shaping
Yeah.
our perceptions. It's easy to get caught up in the political rhetoric and those really attention-grabbing headlines about soaring grocery prices. But when we kind of take a step back and look at the bigger picture, considering both the economic data and our own experiences, it helps us make more informed decisions.
It's like we have to be like, what, economic detectives or something.
Yeah.
Looking past the headlines and the outrage and really trying to figure out what's going on.
It's true. We have to be really savvy consumers of information, especially when it comes to something as complex as like the economy, because the story that we tell ourselves about what's affordable and what's not, that has a real impact on our choices and our lives.
Totally. So for everyone listening, who may be feeling that grocery-induced panic right now,
Yeah.
the data actually suggests that relative to how much we're earning groceries might be more manageable now than they were a few years ago.
Right. But at the same time, it's important to acknowledge that, there are all those other costs that are really squeezing our budgets, rent, healthcare, like those haven't necessarily gotten more affordable just because maybe our salaries have inched up a little bit.
Right. It's all connected. It's like that $4 gallon of milk wouldn't feel so bad if our rent hadn't also gone up, $200 a month.
Exactly. Yeah, it's the combination of all of those rising costs kind of across the board
Yeah.
that really create this feeling of like, wait a minute, can I even afford to live anymore? And that I think is where that sticker shock we were talking about comes back into play, because our brains see that higher price tag on the milk and it triggers this like immediate emotional response, even if logically, we understand that, okay, maybe our wages have increased too.
It's wild. It's like we almost need like a mental reset
Yeah.
to recalibrate our expectations based on the bigger picture.
Yeah. At what point do these higher prices just become our new normal, right? When will that $4 gallon of milk stop feeling so outrageous?
The $1,000,000 question.
Right. Are we going to be sitting here in 10 years being like, oh man, remember when milk was only $4?
Those were the good old days.
Hmm.
Something to think about next time you're staring down those aisles at the grocery store, trying to decide if that name brand cereal is really worth the extra $2.
Right. It's all about finding that balance between, understanding the data, being mindful of our own perceptions and experiences, and then, ultimately making choices that feel right for us.
Well said. Well, on that note, we're going to wrap up this deep dive into the crazy world of grocery prices and perceptions.
It was great being here.
Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
And to everyone listening out there, keep those thinking caps on. Remember, there's always more to the story, and we'll see you next time.